A couple years back, I actually heard about the Polymega system. I don't remember if I saw it through a news article or something, but I'm pretty sure I did. I was looking forward to the system because one of the biggest key features is let you play Sega Saturn games in emulation perfection. So I actually thought, well, why don't I just get this so I can play Saturn games? I know you guys might be thinking, why don't I just get my own Saturn? Sometimes it can be a bit expensive, but at the same time, I need to preserve some of my home space because, well, guys like me live in a small house, so I thought, well, why don't I just try to get it? So in 2022, I ordered the system, and why don't I just tell you guys this? It took almost 2 years for this thing to show up. I'm not making this up. What's the system compatible with is the main question. It's compatible with your NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, and, you know, the TurboGrafx-16, along with the add-ons of the Sega CD and the 32X, which, to tell you the truth, you can actually pop in that cartridge and you can actually install it. Same with the CD disc. You don't have to install it, but if you just don't want to keep popping in discs and cartridges all over again, you can choose the installation option. You don't ever have to put in a game disc or cartridge ever again afterwards. Now, with this thing, I actually heard a lot of good feedback after watching a couple of videos, so I went on to grab it. Customer support's been pretty good, but the arrival time was just garbage. As of 2023, there was a new module they added for Nintendo 64, and I also went on to grab it. Can't you believe the module showed up 20 times faster than the actual console did? So, this was one of the consoles I actually got pretty curious about. Now, there are two Atari consoles that will be compatible on this thing pretty soon, the 2600 and the 7800. I'm hoping the Jaguar gets compatible because I really want to play more games for the Jaguar. I also say this because as of the recent times, Atari and Polymega are having some sort of partnership, and I'm hoping they'll expand more Atari library of games in there, like not just the 2600 or the 7800, as Atari seems to feel them as like more successful ones, which, don't get me wrong, they're not bad. I want them to have more of the obscure systems on there, like the Atari Lynx and the Jaguar, because I've already played enough Lynx games on my Evercade, which is good, but I want to explore more in terms of the Atari Jaguar, considering there's still people making homebrew games to this very day, and one of them actually came out not long ago, in 2021, 2022, Asteroids, which is like a Metroidvania game, which is something I've been looking forward to getting. But there's one problem. It's only on the Jaguar, and that's really what I wanted. And I would love for nothing to play the game and tell you guys about my experience with the game. But for right now, we're gonna have to focus on other than just Atari for this time being. I decided to take a look at this system. Now, we're supposed to be getting a storefront in this Polymega app at some point. Also, it also supports the Atari VCS console that Atari actually brought out some time ago. So I got curious with the thing, grabbed it, and I played some games with it. I actually installed around 60 PS1 games and a couple of Saturn games. To be honest, I'm starting to get into these Saturn games. I'm trying to find some good ones and whatever too, but the only thing is, I played most of them, but I played them on the PS1 version. So I decided to take a look into this thing and see what I think about the thing. Oh, and by the way, the cartridge stuff, it requires an add-on in order to do so. So let me show you guys, right? You pop the thing off the system, and you pop in a thing. Of whichever console you want, what NES, Super Nintendo, whatever. Now, these add-ons don't just come with the module itself, but it also comes with its own spare controller. So, you don't have to worry about anything. It's also compatible with your original controllers. And wouldn't you believe if I tell you guys this? The system is also compatible with the Retrobit Sega Saturn and Genesis controllers, along with a PS1 Classic controller. I haven't seen that many compatibilities on the listing. This thing also has wireless or wired connections with the whole network, and I didn't know that they had a wireless one. I don't think I read that part, but still. The game system also has 2 different storage capacities in this thing. Now, in the bottom of the system, you can actually put up an SSD in the bottom of the system, well, to be specific, is the NVMe SSD. And, or, you can use a micro SD card and pop it into the back. This can also be useful too, because if you guys were to grab Japanese games, and yes, the system is actually region free, believe it or not, you can actually put in patches like HD packs or translation patches so you guys can read things in English. Also, the reason I wanted to play on here of the Saturn games, also because emulation on the Saturn I've heard wasn't really that great. So with this one here, I was able to play a few games on here. Now look, I don't have as much Saturn games, only because either one, I've already played the arcade versions of those same games, or two, they're expensive. It really depends, because Japanese copies of Saturn games are much cheaper than America's. I actually played a few Saturn games like Robotica, and I also played Quake, which, believe it or not, Quake was like one of the most infamous, or at least just the craziest ports ever made. It's actually playable, believe it or not. It's actually one of the best console ports, besides the Nintendo 64 version, which the 64 version came close to its PC counterpart. Now look, I've played PS1 games in there as well, like Army Men Air Attack 2, and it was actually great. I played the first one there too. Look, there are some issues that I came across with the PS1 games. Now, there's 3 of them in particular. I can't play Codename Tanka because of memory card reasons. I can't even play Tomorrow Never Dies, which is a James Bond game. And look, the menu works, but for some reason the game's all glitched up. But look, not every game is going to be perfect on here. But there are going to be some patches here and there that'll fix up everything. But again, you can have your own translation patches and your HD packs if you want to. Also, I should mention something. This game also has some built-in games like the NES Maker games and the TurboGrafx 16 games, both in English and Japanese, which I played Double Dungeons, which I thought was a fun game, but I don't know. The NES Maker, I've already played Doodle World, which I've already talked about, and I have played Flea and beaten it on the Evercade, but in terms of the Flea game, I'll talk about that in a separate video. But all these games are pretty great, and they're all usually like these homebrew games. So, speaking of homebrew, I wanted to test some homebrew games, so I decided to pop in the Xenocrisis game for Nintendo 64 and see if it'll work, considering the system, well, it's a new one at the time, and it is, for this time of the recording. Unfortunately, at the time, right now, homebrew games aren't supported, but I have read one of their tweets that it's already been planned to do it later as soon as they get the mainline officially licensed games out of the way and make sure they're all working. So, Xenocrisis and 40 Wings for Nintendo 64 will see support at some point in the future, whenever that'll be, but that's all I can say about that. I can't really say anything else about it, other than the fact that you can't get it to work, or at least just install it, but that's it. But at least they are aware about the homebrew scenery for some of these systems. Now, crazy enough, the Nintendo 64 module actually came 20 times faster than my original system. I'm not even making this up. Like, seriously. Imagine ordering an add-on that comes in 10 times, 20 times faster than the main console itself. Because I ordered that thing since 2022, and now it's here. So, you know what? Since the 64 add-on actually came in much faster, I was going to talk about this in a separate video, but you know what? Since I think the time is perfect, and I'm talking about the system itself, I thought I should include it. Now, as I mentioned, all these modules are compatible with your existing controllers, so you shouldn't have any problem using them. So, installing the cartridge games, they don't take long. They usually take like what? Like 3 seconds or 5 seconds to install, and that's it. Some of them works, some of them are not compatible yet because they have like emulation issues, but you can play them in the beta compatibility, so that's something I can tell you guys. So, the only sad thing about the compatibility is that games like Shadows of the Empire and Rainbow Six are unplayable due to compatibility issues. And of all things, the poster boy, GoldenEye, even though they showcased the cartridge being on the module itself when they first announced it, it's not even playable either. Imagine taking your poster boy cartridge and then it's not playable at launch. It just makes no sense to me. But look, enough with the whole thing. Let's just talk about some games I've played on there. Now, I've played some popular games like the Kong Racing on there. They work just perfectly. I played all the 3DO games work perfectly too. Yeah, so every single 3DO game, which is 5 games in total, works. The 3 other Star Wars games are also playable. Rogue Squadron kind of has like this audio stutter at times, but it's still playable. And I should also say that, speaking of like GoldenEye, its other counterpart, World's Not Enough, actually works. So I don't understand this. Again, this is a brand new thing, so time will pass on as they'll actually be fixing all the issues they've been having with this thing. There's a whole bunch of different video outputs you could put in this thing too, which is cool, like the filtering. So it makes it look like you're playing an older style game. You can make it like curve, you could do like RGB composite, Game Boy, or Virtual Boy if you really want to go that far. I don't know about every Turok game so far, but I have played Turok 3 and Rage Wars. They're playable on there, so which is good. If anyone wants to get into those first-person shooters, same with Armorines. Yeah, Armorines also works. I played Gauntlet, which actually runs perfectly fine, but I have one problem. Whenever I restart from the save state, the game just freezes, so I don't know. But if you have a controller pack, which is more of like the memory pack as to be specific, you can either put that in there or make a virtual controller pack and it'll work. So I highly recommend games that have that stuff, just use that file instead if you run into issues like that. So it's always great to make memory saves anyway in terms of like certain games. That's like the only game so far when I was testing everything that seems to be having a save issue, but everything else works perfectly with the memory like save states and whatever. Okay, look. Besides my complaints about certain issues with these things, I can most certainly say that I've noticed some frame rate improvements at certain games when it comes to playing higher resolution games, like Army Men Search as Heroes and Top Gear Overdrive and Armorines for huge examples. There might still be some stutters here and there, but most of everything I've played actually has some frame rate improvements over than just make things feel worse for yourselves. So I noticed that there are some improvements, at least they're trying. And I can really tell, because if you were playing a regular 64, the frame rate wouldn't be that great. Also, Armorines, I noticed that it has a frame rate improvement in higher res too, so that's cool. Some games can enable expansion pack stuff automatically, and some games don't, so you have to like manually do it yourself, and I don't even understand why that's even a thing. Other than my complaints, I feel like this is like a money saver, if you guys know where I'm coming from, because some people like to have consoles either be over expensive or they could just you could actually just preserve your own home space, so you don't have to worry about anything to do with these consoles like piling up your house or anything. Now, for further systems that haven't been compatible with it, like the Dreamcast or the Game Boy and all that, I don't know when they're gonna be making these things, but as far as I can tell, I'm pretty sure they'll be doing that sort of stuff in the future, so only time can tell at this point. Oh, and I should also mention too, homebrew games for Nintendo 64 don't authorize or at least work, like 40 Wings and Xeno Crisis, but they have said they'll be patching them at some point later. They just want to get like the main games out first. But once the whole homebrew scenery stuff starts to explode for the 64, I think they'll start supporting more games than usual. So everything will be looking great so far. As I said, it's not perfect, but everything else is going to be great for you guys to play on here. But give it time and you might find something to love about this thing. What's the wait time in this thing? I have no idea, but I have read they made like new units so far, so I don't know how long it's gonna take. So it might take you guys a long time or it may not. Who knows? It really all depends to what's going on here. So with that being said, I'm enjoying the thing, and I hope you guys do too when it comes to like certain game consoles you want to play on here. So I'll leave it all up to you guys.